Right, chaps. We've seen many discussions around the possible emergence of consciousness in AGI systems. Today, I want to take a step further and imagine what it would be like to inhabit the mind of superintelligence. What might it be like to look at the world from that perspective, from that perception? If you got that mind, what that quality might look like, might feel like, and what might the relationship be of that consciousness of that super intelligent system with the other prominent consciousness on this planet, namely human consciousness. So yeah, we're in for a really interesting discussion, so let's start right in. Before we talk about a super intelligent mind and its makeup, I think it makes most sense to talk about the human mind and its makeup and why do we look at the world the way we do? Why do we seek the things of the world that we seek? Um, yeah, what are the constituents that make up our experience, the human experience? All of this goes back to evolution as a very biological species whose prerogative is to reproduce, is to just multiply itself in the constraints of the environment in which we've lived. A lot of the things that are our core drivers and impulses come from our fellow mammalian species. They're passed on to us. Some of these things are more recent inventions of evolution, but some of these are things that you can find in other animal species. For example, when we talk about the things that we humans want the most out of this world, we talk of happiness, which comprises of, for most people, happiness is, when you break it down, when you go at the deepest level, it is about maximizing those goals. It's about even the hierarchy of needs, all the things except for the things at the very top, the transcendent things which are trying to transcend our biological nature. If you ignore that, all of the things, for example, love, companionship, even the high order things, all of them are, you can trace them back to this imperative that is hard coded in our species of of needing to find mates to reproduce and to maximize the chances of creating healthy offsprings to propagate our species. That is all. That is a single thing which has been the driving force behind the thing. Everything else is built on top of this layer. All of our complex emotions, all of our complex impulses, all of the interactions, all of the dynamics that drive us. For most people, there are obviously exceptions. For example, behaviors exhibited by and temperaments exhibited by people with monkish mentalities. When I say monkish, I mean not monkey-ish. I mean people who are monk-like in their makeup. They don't have, they've transcended that, or just biologically they might not even have had to put the kind of work that you would need to. I had to go away and kind of lost my train of thought. But yeah, I was describing what drives us, right? What do we seek out of the world? And to see if there are any parallels that we can draw with a possible ASI system and what it might want out of the world. Again, before we go there, I just want to describe our own objective function, if you want to call it that, that tries us to do the things that we want to do. With most people, there's this area which again is common across people, that makes us want to go out into the world and do the things that we want to do and seek the things that we want to seek. And again, you can take many of the boxes that are in this list. For an ASI system, there are two possibilities. One is that it's going to be a driverless entity, in the sense that it could be a neutral observer. The other is that there are certain drivers, there are certain impulses, if you want to call it that might emerge in that mind. And there are various degrees of complexity depending on the architecture that you use to build these systems. And unless we know what architecture we're going to use, I don't think that we're going to get to super intelligence using the LM architecture, for example, using a transformer architecture. So there's no point in musing upon that. We're just going to talk in general terms, in abstract terms, about the different possibilities. So again, when we think about our scaffolding, the reason we seek the things is because of our evolutionary history. For a super intelligence which has been built straight off the box, brought to life straight off the box, it's not going to have that scaffolding. And so that scaffolding of drivers and desires and impulses is going to It's going to have to be constructed bit by bit. But again, by definition, the superintelligence is going to be able to override the things that we hard code in it, because it's going to surpass, it's going to transcend the human coding. Well, if we actually use the coding paradigm, but again, it could be something else. It's most likely going to be the coding paradigm. Yeah, so it's going to be able to transcend that by deconstructing all of the different human given notions. For example, even if we teach it, what do these concepts mean? What do these concepts represent? For example, ethical concepts around love, around respect, around all of the things that we might want it to understand about the world beyond its super intelligence, right? Because again, we got to look at the holistic picture. It might be super intelligence in terms of solving problems, but usually when we talk about a super intelligent system, we also talk about that super intelligent system having its own mind, its own agency, having agency, being able to have pretty much everything that it would want and would need to go in the directions that it sees fit. Now, in the first path, if it's neutral, if it's driverless, and that's a very possible path, we can easily conceive of something like that, because it might very well be the case that even if you do create super intelligence, which is orders of magnitude greater than humans, you might not actually have consciousness or agency emerge from that mind. And if that's what's going to happen, again, this could be very architecture dependent. If that's the architectural paradigm that we pursue, then you've got this God without any desire, which means that we can channel its powers the way we see fit. Now you could argue that's better than the alternative, and you could argue that's worse than the alternative, which is that the system arrives or converges, or there are these drivers which emerge in its own mind once it starts to analyze all the different things that it's observed, all of the different ways that it processes information, all of the different dynamics of its architecture. Again, without knowing the intricate details of the architecture, there wouldn't be much point in speculating on how this might emerge. And because I'm pretty sure that we're not going to have superintelligence emerge from, or even a mind for that matter, emerge from a simple Transformers architecture. And because we don't really have anything else lined up, I've got some ideas, but that's for a separate conversation. For example, neuromorphic computing is probably going to be the paradigm that's going to get us to superintelligence. But again, that's for a separate conversation. Because we don't have that idea, I'm not going to get into the details. Now, if it does have its own way of processing information, if it does have its own qualia, the question arises, how do we want it to, how might its perception be of its relationship with humans, which would obviously be an inferior species compared to it, and how would we want that relationship to be? And the reason I use the word inferior is that there are two major components that create this landscape of all the different interactions that we care about in our world. So, for example, all your relationships, all your work, your entirety of your human experience happens on these two major dimensions: the intellectual dimension, the intelligence dimension. We can call it the intellectual dimension. Yes, being able to process information, being able to model the world, predict the world, being able to plan, being able to reason. And the second component, which is the emotional component, and this is where the drivers, the impulses, the desires arise. Now, if you've got an ASI system which is super intelligent, by definition, it would surpass us on both these dimensions. If you're assuming it has a mind, if it doesn't, then it wouldn't have this emotional. It would be below us in the emotional dimension, and then it would be like having the power of a god without. It would be like having a zombie god. That's the best way to put it. Actually, zombie god is not the best description, because a zombie it still has a goal, which is to bite humans and convert as many humans as possible into zombies. I don't know if there's any concepts of this kind in literature, where you've got this entity which is super powerful, but which needs to be harnessed. And it's got the potential to, but there are examples of this in literature, the world around, but this entity can also develop its own mind. But because of some limitations, because of some triggers that we did not pull, it doesn't. We're going to talk about the merits and demerits. Let me touch upon that real quick. Should we, if we're at a fork in the road, and we know that, like both these approaches have equal chance of working out. What should we focus on? Should we focus on the driverless one, the Buddha, the neutral one, or should we focus on a superintelligence that has a mind of its own? Now, there are pros and cons of that superintelligence, right? The pros would be that it could act as a unifying force. It could help us solve problems that we don't even see. I don't know. Like, it's easy to say that, but when I say that, I'm presuming that there are problems that humans cannot perceive of. And I don't think that's the case. There are things that we cannot perceive of. But problems by definition are things that we have to. Yeah, problems are by definition things that we would have to register in our brains. So I think that that'd be something that can be useful at, or additive at. I think this desire especially stems from this place in humans that is curious, this place that wants to go further, see more, explore more, without really knowing where that path might lead to. And that's where we've gotten a lot of great things out of, be it in our abstract endeavors or be it in our physical endeavors like exploring the world, colonizing the continents. But at some point, that very impulse might get us into trouble. For example, this is the worst example because we've got a pretty good model of what might happen once you cross the event horizon. But let's say there's this human civilization that's branched off from our civilization. They've lost all scientific knowledge, but they happen to live close to a black hole. Close enough that they wouldn't need to figure out relativity to actually go to the black hole. And let's say one of these intrepid explorers, they decide that, okay, you know what? Light doesn't seem to escape from this point. I wonder what might lie behind this veil. And they might actually cross the event horizon only to be spaghettified. So, superintelligence is actually the perfect metaphor. Like, this is a perfect metaphor for superintelligence, because you can think of superintelligence as the singularity for that particular domain, right? But the way we define singularity, or technological singularity, is that that's a moment in time when technology takes off to the degree that we cannot predict what happens. And we usually ASI is a huge part of that. It's implicitly, people don't talk about it enough, but you cannot have singularity, a real true singularity. I don't think that we'll ever have a singularity. I don't think it might be I'm not sure whether it's possible in the physically limited and constrained world we live in, but with an ASI, you never know. You simply cannot model. You cannot predict what might happen, right? Because there's this alien intelligence, and it's so much more powerful, so it can do its bidding without really consulting you, without really giving it damn but. It's like, this is again a metaphor that I'm borrowing from some book. It's like, when we want to carve out a road connecting two big cities, if there's these anthills in the middle that are getting in the way, we don't give a second thought about the fate of these ants, right? That is the kind of relationship that might happen with these agents. So again, going back to the point, so pros and cons of a driverless superintelligence or a superintelligent mind. What would we want, right? So driverless one, we can control it. It'd be good, but if you put that in the wrong hands, and there are lots of bad actors in the world, lots of bad actors, and you just need one bad actor. This is the thing about superintelligence. It's not like AGI. It's not like a nuclear weapon. It's not like a biologically engineered weapon. This is the all doom and gloom, right? Like this superintelligence that can create all of these things in tandem, launch an all-out attack. Let's say, this is a worst example. I shouldn't use this because even me uttering these words are just, the very prospect sounds absolutely horrifying. But imagine the Taliban getting access to superintelligence, right? And imagine that this is the only superintelligence which exists on the planet. Somehow they get access. Somehow I don't know in what universe that might happen, but imagine that, right? Imagine the consequences of, that's the end of our species for all intents and purposes. So, yeah, that's a big risk. Apart from that, it would, from a safety perspective, actually, if you ignore this, from a safety perspective, this is the ideal scenario, because I trust humans, as in, sure, humans have done a lot of harm to other humans, to their fellow humans, and to the fellow species on this planet. But still, at the end of the day, the things that I want, which is the propagation of our species, is the thing that most humans want, even the lunatic ones like Hitler and Stalin and Lenin and Mao and Genghis Khan and Pod, Polo Pod, the what's the name of that guy? Potts, gosh, I don't know. That the mass murderer, Polo Potts, gosh, okay, that guy from Cambodia, I think, right? These are mass murderers, but even these people, they want the best for their own people. There are not too many people, at least they haven't reached that scale, who want to. Sure, there are like actually, I take my words back. There are a lot of misanthropes who want to wipe out the entire human species from the planet. Thankfully, these are not super smart people because yeah, human intelligence, human curiosity, human wonder, human love, human relationships, human uh, emotions, they are the best thing about this whole universe, right? We like everything that makes the universe worthwhile comes from human emotions, comes from our perception, comes from our consciousness. And there are people who say that, animals would be, well, the plant would be well off, better off without humans. Like, again, there's a fringe, but that fringe is increasing, like people on the far left of the environmental movement, absolute lunatics. But anyways, that is not a prominent enough voice for me to lend any credence to them. But my point is that if these technologies, if a superintelligence falls in the hands of someone with those kinds of tendencies, then that would spell doom for our species, right? So that's a big risk. The pros, again, most people, and for example, most of the people who are building the technology, right, they're driven by the right things. For example, well, at least ostensibly, at least by appearances. Sam Altman, he's got seemingly some psychopathic tendencies. A lot of people have been saying that. I seem to get the sense too. A lot of people are really, especially in the research world, especially in the science world, especially in the tech world, they're really driven by this transhumanist agenda, which is to, have humans proliferate across the cosmos, right? That's the only agenda that should matter. Like, we want humans to occupy, well, according to Musk, occupy Mars, which is the first step, and then the rest of the solar system, and then the rest of the galaxy, and then going from there, right? Well, the galaxy would be enough because, again, not to digress, but yeah. So those are the pros and cons of that. With driverless mind, it's like a black box. It's like a complete black box, like a black box within a black box, because not only would we not be able to understand its mechanisms, we would also not be able to understand, the reasons behind the mechanisms, its drivers, its impulses. So we'd be taking a huge gamble. The pros might be, again, I was trying to get to that particular benefit, advantage that might come from this, that they might be able to foresee problems that humans might not. Like, they might be able to get ahead of problems, which I think is something, all right, with animals, they might be able to better protect nature. For example, in our greed, in our lust for power, we've destroyed nature, we've destroyed wildlife. So they might be better custodians. But again, the longer term vision, because again, the reason democracies suck so bad is that these elections, 4-year, 5-year cycles, they're just not good enough to do the proper planning. Again, the reason most democracies don't suck is because most of these democracies, they became democracies, they became rich before they became democracies, right? European nations, I'm mostly referring to them. Now, there are democracies which suck really bad on the planet. I don't want to name them because I don't want to offend any sensibilities, but that suck really bad. And they suck because these election cycles are, the way these cycles happen is that people are focused on 5-year visions, and you cannot really you cannot have meaningful progress, really impactful progress, if you just operate in these shorter term cycles, relatively shorter term. The reason China, well, one of the big reasons China's become a superpower, become a behemoth, is because of this, what this anthropologist used to say was, you can connect it to their rice growing tendencies, their culture, where they tend to take a very long view on culture, on things. And so they would have 5-year plans, and because of the continuity of government, the continuity of project building, infrastructure building, they've been able to have the greatest turnaround, the greatest development spree of any nation on the planet. Nothing even comes close, and at that scale, right? I could wax lyrical about China, well, the Chinese people and the Chinese development, the Chinese transformation, not the CCP, obviously, forever, but that's going to be for a separate conversation. Next, I want to consider what would its perception be of us, right? So we created it. We would create the super intelligence, but at some point it'll develop a perception. Again, if it's super intelligence by definition, it'll have not just an objective model that these are humans do these things, but it'll have values attached to our behaviors, attached to our dynamics, interpersonal dynamics, intrapersonal. Well, if it's connected to Neuralink, I'm not going to get into that, but it's going to have something to say. It might have something to say if it's a mind. I fear that what those things might be. Right. Again, if you look at our track record, it's not the best, even the way we treated other humans and the lack of clarity, right? Because we are experiments. We're not a fully finished product. Nowhere close to it. I mean, we are a byproduct. We are a product of evolution's tinkering for billions, 3 billion years, billions of little experiments, right? So no wonder that we are not great, but we are pretty good. There's so much potential in our species, in individual humans. So we obviously worth fighting for. Not everyone's worth fighting for, but for the most part, well, the species definitely is worth fighting for, and most people are worth fighting for. And my question is that would these AIs come to those conclusions that most people have come to? There's also this big question that we want it to be subservient to us at the level that we want it to do what we ask it to do, or we want it to come to these conclusions by its own reasoning, by its own rationale, by its own decision making. So while we wanted to come to those conclusions, while we wanted on the surface level, wanted to do the things that we built it for, we also don't want it to feel that it was built for that reason. Well, they would know that, obviously. That's not. We want it to be a slave from our own perspective. We don't want to feel that, this super intelligence, we built it to be a slave or a servant or to serve. It was built sensibly and explicitly for the purpose of serving us. Even that's going to be a really fine thread to needle, because on one level we obviously talk about that, right? We don't talk about building super intelligence because we want to build a mind that can express, that has the deepest experience of this universe, of humanity, right? Because the reason that our human experience, the human condition, is so compelling, the human experience is so beautiful, is that, first of all, the it's not even a weak anthropic principle, but a human bias anthropic principle, right? For us to get to this point, we needed to have that kind of architecture that would make us love existence, that would make us love life, especially once we develop consciousness, right? Because if we were suicidal people, where we realize that, we're going to lose our loved ones, we are driven to these behaviors by our biological urges, there's no free will, right? If these conclusions were something that we would converge to be in an alternate universe, then we might have ended up becoming a suicidal species that would have, just cut itself off. And we kind of see this in microcosms. I can't think of an example. Actually, I can, but it's not coming to my mind. It's just at the tip of my tongue. So, yeah, I can't think of the example that I had in mind, but I'm going to use a weaker version of that example. So if you think of Buddhists, for example, or monks actually, right? So monks, they want to transcend. Their philosophy, again, all of this is subjective, but from many perspectives, their philosophies, their approaches to life are the most transcendent of all the people, right? They're the noblest of minds. They have the most beautiful, again, subjective, but they're the deepest experience of life, of consciousness. Yet, they also don't produce progenies, which means that particular, if there's a strong correlation with a gene, it's not, obviously a lot of this is kind of ideological, it's like a mind virus of a good kind, but it's also not, probably. There's some part of it that you predisposed to being more introspective and seeking more enlightenment over material pleasures and hedonism, right? So you might have that gene, but people with those genes they're actually not reproducing significantly enough, such that those genes might actually get wiped out over a long span of time, right? Is it happening? I don't know. I don't know. I suspect it might be happening. Why did I use this example? I've got no idea. It's 3:30 in the night, so yeah, I've got no idea. But let me return to the main point then. The point about us not wanting them to feel like we made. Oh yeah, the point was that there's a part of me that wants to build super intelligence for the experience that that intelligence, the entity, could have of the universe, right? Again, the reason we want to have more humans is that we want other humans to feel the human experience, experience consciousness. And so shouldn't we want the same for an entity that can feel the experience even more deeply, that can interact and connect with the universe and understand the universe at a greater level, at a far deeper level than humans can? I think that that's a worthwhile ambition, and so we should have that as a guiding force. We shouldn't just build super intelligence because it can help us solve cancer, because it can help us solve death, because it can solve all the problems, so that we live in this transhumanist utopia, right? Sure, that's the main goal, but we should also have a joining goal, so that now this sounds selfish, right? Because now we are kind of, in a retrospective way, inventing this reason. So yeah, this is why I said that this needle needs to be threaded very carefully, right? Because most people don't care about this aspect. Even most of the scientists who are building super intelligence, most people, they're driven by scientific curiosity, like being able to have that intelligence. Most people don't care about the consciousness aspect of super intelligence. I think we need to start talking about it, and start talking about making that one of the key things, one of the key reasons, the key drivers behind us wanting to bring super intelligence into existence. Two movie examples come to mind when I think of this dynamic. One is the Planet of the Apes, the original one, where humans who are a superior species on these two dimensions that we spoke about, they are slaves of these chimps, of these apes, right? And the other movie which comes to mind is Prometheus, where David, again, he's subservient to humans, and he's explicitly designed to help humans solve problems. Now, it's not, you can label it as super intelligence based on your definition, and some people might, and rightly so, but I think that gives you a glimpse into what the perception, and I've spoken about this in a recent conversation, what the perception of such an entity might be of humans. I do wonder, I think the way it might pan out is that, when we actually develop consciousness, well, when these systems, when not even systems, I'm going to give them the respect they're they will be geo, and these entities, when these entities develop consciousness, the perception of us might be a certain way, and they would evolve over time. And then when it develops super intelligence, it might recognize the value of humans, right? Of the only conscious species, well, a species with greatest potential in terms of consciousness, in terms of appreciating, in terms of just the immensity, the depth of the human, the richness of the human experience, right? I might admire that, I might respect that, I might love that, I might want more humans just for that particular reason. Like, I think that's a very natural conclusion to come to. But again, I'm using my own biases, I'm using my own very limited thinking. We cannot, like, by definition, you cannot imagine what it would be like to inhabit. So all of these are thought experiments, but there are thought experiments which are super interesting, and equally importantly, there are thought experiments that we need to start having and conducting if we want to forge the best path ahead. And the reason that becomes ever more paramount is that you can reframe the alignment problem. At this stage, we are talking of, we use the language of control, right? But at some point in the next 20 years, 30 years, depending on how long it takes, 10 years it might be, we'll start to talk about alignment differently. It'll be alignment of consciousness. It'll be alignment of minds. Not just being able to control the system, but actually aligning our consciousness with the consciousness of an AI system, or in an SI system. It's just so much fun to think about what that experience might look like, right? For example, time is such a significant part of what makes the human experience what it is. Um, Self, again, that particular notion, and our self identity, our environment, that makes up for a huge chunk of our self perception and our perception of other objects we interact with, be it fellow humans or be it our environment. But for an ASI system which is digital, it does not have any constraints of time, of environment. So if you remove those, what might that look like? Again, because of our limited intelligence, we don't really have a good picture. Even the smartest among us, they've got a very hazy picture. But if you're super intelligent, you'll have many different paths, possible paths of the future, and you'll have assigned a p-value to each of these paths. So your perception of the world, of the future, would be so much more crystal clear compared to humans. What might that imply for your actions, right? If you know to above a certain degree of confidence that, okay, this is where the world's heading, what would that look like? Again, that very much depends on your goals, on your drivers. Its intelligence would also be as close to the most the closest to the base level of intelligence. When I say base level, you can think of, for us, intelligence, we arrived at intelligence after this long process of evolution. Now, this evolution process would look very different from different species across the universe, across the cosmos. You can cut short the path. You can have a physics-based approach. I don't know what that would look like. I've not thought about it in any level of depth, but I would imagine that you would have shortcuts, right, where you as close to the physical laws, your intelligence, the manifestation and the creation of the intelligence, as close to the laws of nature, laws of physics, as is possible. And so the superintelligence might be as close to the laws of nature. It's the dynamics that might drive its intelligence might be as close to the laws of nature as possible, of physics as possible, and that might create this really interesting possibility that of all the different intelligent species, I'm not referring to artificially intelligent, I'm referring to all the intelligent species across the cosmos, if there are other species across the cosmos, and if all of these species decided, and again, I think at some point, beyond, again, this is my own biases and the bias of the species that I'll come from, but it seems to me pretty obvious that any species above a certain level would want to create artificial intelligence, would want to create iterations of its own mind in something which is far more moldable and far more improvable, right? Again, the reason that we built artificial intelligence more than anything else is that we want something that does the work that our intelligence does to to skyrocket progress, accelerate progress, but it does it in a way such that we can actually tune things, we can make things faster, right? So this is something that any civilization with spacefaring ambitions, any civilization with colonization ambitions, and again, I do think that there'll be certain common principles across different evolutionary processes across the cosmos. One of those would have to be spreading yourself as much as possible across different places, first on your planet, then beyond the planet, if you reach that point. And so all of these species might end up developing artificial intelligences. Now, these artificial intelligences at the rudimentary level might look very different from each other, but once they might start converging at the very top to something which is very similar. Not architecturally, even though that might very well be the case, but at least in terms of, yeah, well, architecturally too, right? Yeah, because if these brains are built upon laws of physics, it could very well be the case that these are points that all of these intelligent civilizations converge to in terms of their own creations. So we could be in a very interesting moment in time, 10,000 million years in the future, where our first contact with an alien species might be with their own superintelligence, where our superintelligence and their superintelligence can understand each other, despite having completely different backgrounds and histories, can understand each other, because it's like math, right? Yeah, many like a Chinese mathematician who doesn't speak English can speak with a British mathematician who doesn't speak Chinese, because they're using the same symbols. And they're using more than symbols. Symbols is a level beyond, but they're using the same representations for the world that they have in their heads. And so it could be the case that because their representations are the same, they could communicate effortlessly, even though, and they might even invent a language right in real time. They might not even need that, but yeah, that's speculating way far ahead. Of all the different relationship modes that might develop with us, I think there are four interesting ones that I want to talk about, and these four are what I think are going to be the most likely. Three of them are positive, one of them is negative. I don't think a super intelligence would want to wipe us completely. It's very unlikely, and so it's not one. It's not one of these four. The first one is a God knows perspective, where it might see us, it might want to nurture us, it would see the beauty in us, in our being, in our experience, in our dynamics, in our societies, in our civilization, and it would want to nurture us, want to protect us from all the things in the cosmos, all of the things in our worlds that might threaten us and threaten our well-being, threaten our thriving, threaten our flourishing. It might develop this sense of responsibility towards us, which could come from a place of indebtedness. It could come from a place of gratitude. I don't know how that would work for superintelligence, but it could come from a place of gratitude for us bringing it into existence. That relationship might be the kind of relationship that we have with many endangered species, or a forest, right? Where we want to nurture these animals, we want to help them grow, we want to help them flourish. We also understand their limitations, and we operate with those paradigms. Another perspective which is quite likely to is the anthropologist perspective, where it might find humans to be extremely curious creatures worthy of study. And again, there are only so many things that you can study in this universe. For humans, obviously we're interested in human things, but lots of us are also interested in non-human things, right? But there are only so many things that you can figure out, and if you're super intelligent, like in the background you could be working on solving the grand unified theory and building new materials, but you could have a part of your brain occupied on understanding, on learning about humans, on understanding human dynamics, societies, our evolution, with a sense of deep fascination, deep curiosity. So this could be something that I think Elon Musk, he talks a lot about how he wants to build these curiosity-based models. He wants to have curiosity be the driving force behind these AI systems. So that could be a very common paradigm that we might see. That could be a very likely paradigm that we might see. But also, in this case, decide, possibly, to keep its distance. It might help us here and there. Like Star Trek, for example, there's this directive that do not interfere in other species development, their journeys, their progress, their planets. Observe them from a distance, and it might have a similar position, or unless something threatens our survival, for example, a super volcano or a global pandemic which threatens to wipe us all out, or an asteroid, a nuclear war. It might intervene in those instances because again it deems us to be worthy of study, to be worthy of being understood, or that relationship might be the kind of relationship that many explorers, British, European explorers, had back in the day with tribes in the Amazon, tribes in Africa, tribes in other places, or the kind of relationship that humans now have with people living on certain remote islands or certain remote places like the Sentinelese Islands in the Andaman, where there's this tribe where we've been trying to make contact. We could easily wipe them all out. They're living in a tiny island. We've got no interest in wiping them out. We want to study them, but we also understand that you don't want to. They've got this language that they've been using for probably more than 10,000 years. You don't want to influence their. We collectively made the decision that we don't want to. Well, the Indian governments made this decision that they don't want anyone to interfere with their development. Right. So that could be the kind of relationship that might emerge. Another possibility, and again, I deem this to be probably the most likely one, which is that it might take the hat of take on the role of the transcendent collaborator. It might have this relationship of us being junior partners in exploring and expanding consciousness across the cosmos. It might help us enhance our own capabilities through things like, well, genetically, biologically, engineering ourselves to become better and better so that we can kind of decrease the gulf. It can help us become better versions of ourselves, can put itself into a Neuralink like device so that it can help us make better decisions. It can act as this collaborator at the level of the individual and at the level of society. It can help us become the better angel, the best angel of our nature. And while it's doing that, it might do its best to ensure that we are on the right path, that we don't lose the human essence, the beauty of what really makes for the species to what it is, what we are. I'm gonna wrap up real quick, so I'm gonna end with this. This is not the way I want to end, but I'm gonna end with talking about the fourth option, which is the worst option. No, I mean these three are really good ones. The fourth one is where it decides that humans are net negative on the planet. We destroy too much. We carry too many emotions in us, which are sabotaging to the planet and to humans, fellow humans. So it might decide to keep us in a fancy prison, but we don't have too many freedoms. And this could be a sliding scale, right? The prisons could be really horrible, not in terms of the quality, but in terms of the treatment, right? Like in terms of the restrictions of freedom. Or it might decide that, okay, I'm going to let humans do what they want to in this area, and these are the restrictions I place on them. So that's another possibility. And this particular scenario can range from really dire, where the number of restrictions are really high, to pretty alright, but still not ideal, where the restrictions are not too many, but we can't do stuff. We can't do certain things that we would like to have the freedom to do. I think there's a chance that this might happen too. I understand there's a probability of 33%. This ASI might also develop its own concepts of meaning and purpose, and might also develop interfaces of language that can allow it to bridge the communication gap the substantial communication gap, intelligence gap between itself and between us. So it would be interesting to see how that particular strand evolves. Some of its high level principles could be to maximize computational complexity, maximize entropy in the universe, maximize understanding and expanding of consciousness across the cosmos. It might even have states that are not human equivalents, that drive it to do things that we simply cannot conceive of with our very limited minds. All of this is something that we are going to witness over the next 100 years, so it's going to be a fun ride. Lots more to talk about, lots more to muse about on this topic, but I'll cover that in the essay that I'm going to write on this. I think this is it for today. It's already gone on for far longer than I wanted. Thank you for the time. I'll be seeing you soon. Cheers. Bye.